The ground quakes. The blue dragon rears up out of her lair, causing even the storm giants to seem afraid. You have traveled across the wastes of Kadath to find me, but you have found only your death. Wah!
That's great. I'm just gonna play VR instead, dude. Okay, so you
Wait, what?
you get on with that. I'm gonna. I mean, this is new hotness and all.
There's a dragon.
There we go. Hello, I am Inkblitz,
Hi, I'm the Niche.
and we're talking about how people think that 5e is boring.
I don't get it.
I mean, specifically Dungeons and Dragons 5e, because I don't know if there's a 5e of something else. I don't understand it. Nietzsche, why do people think that it's boring?
I don't know, and we just throw a disclaimer out here at the front that it's impossible to be wrong about how you feel. If you feel bored by D&D 5e, you're not wrong. However, it is perfectly possible for us to disagree with you, and we're going to.
And we're going to disagree with you just this once.
So I mean, we've played Pathfinder together. I've played every version of D&D there ever was, and lots of other games.
I played 3.5, Shadowrun, something else. I played, yeah.
So I mean, 5e isn't perfect. No rule system is. No. But it's very good, actually. And
we believe that it's a very good system.
Yeah, it's a great sort of big tent catch-all. It's good enough that most people can find something good out of it, and we're not here for an edition war either, So I'm not going to be like, 5e is great and 4e sucked and 2e was the bomb, and we're not going to be doing that.
I mean, I have opinions about 4e, but we're not going there.
But I do want to talk about this idea that 5e is boring, because I've been seeing lots of people, some of it is clickbaity, 5e is boring and how to fix it kind of stuff, and some of it is just people just bringing up, like, in conversation, this idea.
You've definitely seen more of it than I have, because most of my friends are playing 5e, and either that or they're just finding 5e and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And so I've seen some YouTubers and I've seen some personalities say that, it's boring, it's dull, it's old hat, it's just dull. And having played it for, oh my gosh, 2 years, 3 years now. So when we started Storm King, when we started Caves of Chaos,
I think that was 2016 or 2017. So it's been a while.
It's been 3 to 4 years since I've started playing 5e, and I love it. Like, I feel like it's been the most exciting Dungeons and Dragons for me, in my opinion.
So I mean, I think some of it is we need to, like, define our terms about what is boring, because when they say that it's boring, they could mean any number of things. They could mean that it's repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
Could mean it's samey. It could mean that they feel like there's not enough options or something. One person I saw referred to it as a dice rolling simulator.
Okay.
Whatever that means. Or attack roll simulator, I think was the term that they used. And I think some of it is also just edition burnout. 5e is a mature edition now. It's been out for 5 years. At this point in 3e, they had already gone through 3.5 and were starting to do stuff to move towards 4. Whereas with 5e, they deliberately have been trying to keep it stretched out, because the original D&D lasted for almost a decade before it became popular, and then they had AD&D. Well, they had basic D&D and AD&D and second edition D&D, all of which were mutually compatible with each other. They were basically the same game with different dressing.
Mm-hmm.
So in the life cycle of D&D, 5e is a mature system, and I think that to some extent people have just sort of
gotten tired of it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that they also went for with 5e was to simplify it and to make it everything more less complex. So
Yes.
that definitely, I can in that way I can say that it does seem a little more samey, because a lot of the classes, a lot of the abilities between the classes can be samey. We've also gotten rid of the differences between divine spells and arcane spells, and there's these little things that are not as complex.
In order to make it flexible so that you don't need a cleric, you could have a bard or a paladin and be the healer, and you end up with the same sort of big four roles of DPS, healer, controller, and tank. But I think to some extent, like what they're talking about being boring in 5e is stuff that's boring in D&D, right? Some of the core conceits of Dungeons and Dragons are you play one of these four types.
Mm-hmm.
You go out into this Dungeons and Dragons land, whether it's Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Eberron or whatever,
mm-hmm.
and you fight monsters. That's what you do in D&D.
Right.
And if you do that every week for years, it's going to get boring. If like combat is all you do in D&D, right? That's going to be boring.
Well, yeah, because combat in D&D, at least in terms of the players, it's very easy. It's easier on the players to defeat what's in front of them, and the DM definitely has a harder time to give their players a challenge in terms of combat, especially in the higher levels. As we've reached Storm King's Thunder, and you regularly say that it's like you're trying to find new ways to challenge us, even just with using the encounters that are in the book. It's you have to bump it up to really find a way to give us in combat some sort of something that makes it more life and death. And then, I don't think we've ever had in our entire 4 years a single player death.
No, we haven't.
We haven't.
The last time I had a player character die actually was Jamie's character in my attempts to run a Borderlands game set in Savage Worlds using the Savage Worlds rule set.
Okay.
So yeah, so 5e combat is very forgiving, actually. But then so the question is, if D&D is boring you, especially if 5e is boring you, well, what would make it interesting, and how would you address that? So let's talk about that a little.
It's like people are always saying it's boring, but what are you going to do about it?
It's not a system issue. I mean, it's a group issue. Any game, any role-playing game, with the possible exception of some weird indie thing from the 90s where you never rolled dice, could be boiled down to attack roll simulator.
Yes.
And in early editions of D&D, I mean, especially like 1E, 2E, the classes didn't have a whole lot of abilities, right? You had your attack bonus, you had your armor class, you had your hit points, and if you were a spellcaster, you had your spells. There was nothing else. There were no...
Yeah, basically, if you were a fighter, it was I attack. I attack.
This round I attack twice. Next round I attack once. This round I attack twice. There was no cunning action. There was no...
Right. There was no second wind. There was no interesting things.
Yeah, and then like in 3rd edition, you had the nightmare of +1, +2, +1, -1.
I do remember that.
And so 5e was like, all this fiddly little math. This is boring. We want big, impactful stuff, so we have advantage and disadvantage. We want stuff that moves fast at the table, etc.
Now, could it be that a lot of the people who are complaining that 5e is boring liked that? They got used to all the numbers. They got used to padding up those damage numbers or those attack numbers, and you get used to it, and it's like, well, this is what it's about. You start to feel this is how, and for them that's probably what it's about.
Yeah,
you're feeling
it's entirely possible.
The higher the number, the more complex it feels to them, and the more interesting.
Yeah. And for those people, Pathfinder still exists, right? It's in its 2nd edition now, and it's going great guns, and if that's what you dig,
I've read it.
I do not. I do not. I find looking at Pathfinder stuff painful now. But
I've tried it. I've tried to
yeah.
go back to Pathfinder, and I mean, if someone ran it, I would run it. I would play it, but I wouldn't run it myself.
Like in our last session that I ran, the big fight with Sir Fox's druid.
Mm-hmm.
Sir Fox's lizard folk druid was shapeshifted into a werebear, right? And was on the ceiling.
Yep.
Clumped onto the head of a
dire
vampire.
Bear,
Yeah, she was a bear. Her head was clumped onto the head of a vampire who was also hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
While Jamie's bugbear barbarian was leaping off of the pillar and swinging axes
wailing
through
at
the air.
It was just Cuisinart.
It was this big, hairy, exciting combat. And
literally, it was very hairy.
Yeah, it was extremely hairy. And literally the same night after we had this crazy gonzo fight in 5e, I looked at Twitter and there was somebody talking about how boring 5e is, and I'm like,
are we playing the same edition?
5e is designed for maximum DM empowerment compared to 3rd edition and 4th edition, and also player empowerment. Your character sheet is the least important thing that you have for a fight. The most important thing is up here, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're in a room full of kobolds, then yes, you could run up to the first kobold and whack him. Run up to the next kobold, whack him. But what else could you do?
That's pretty dull. Like what else is there?
Is there bedding? Set the bedding on fire. Is there a water tower? Bring the water tower down on them, etc.
You could you could throw something at the ceiling and have the entire ceiling collapse on them. And kobolds being kobolds, they're 5 to 10 hit points. They're probably gonna die.
Yeah, and 5e has 5e a system in place for doing these ad hoc rulings. The most simple way of doing it is player says, I want to do X, and GM says, okay, make a dex check, DC 15, or a athletics check, or whatever. Or even don't even bother to make a check. That sounds great. Do it,
Just do it. That is something that has definitely not been seen in previous editions. Like 4th edition, I believe they really focused on putting everything out, having everything that you can do out. This is what you can do in this round. These are all the things you can do specifically per whatever.
Well, I mean, sort of. I mean, we played 4th edition. We tried it out. We gave it a fair shake and decided it was not for us. But everybody's sort of powers were laid out. And you had them like color coded on your character sheet, so you knew which ones you could do all the time, which ones you could do once per encounter, which ones you could do once per day. And on the environment, the maps would have in the DM's notes, there'd be like a fire pit, and the DM's notes would include the difficulty of throwing somebody into the fire pit and how much damage it would do, things like that. And they had the famous page 42, which was at every level. Here's a baseline DC, here's a baseline damage for doing like stunts and things, which 5e sort of has. There's a table in the DMG about this much damage is a nuisance, this much damage is deadly, etc. And you just
but 5e doesn't really have something like that. Like we've created some homebrew stuff to fill that gap because we felt like I think both of us felt like the players weren't doing these unique things. They weren't going out of their way to do things other than attack or cast spells.
Yeah,
and
well,
so,
I mean, we did build out a sort of stunt system, but that was based on what was already there.
Players aren't really encouraged to do those sort of things. They're encouraged to take those unique steps and to do those interesting things.
Well, I think some of that has got to be, that's got to be something that they've like seen in action, and something, like we're all used to video games where the computer can only handle certain things, and so those are the things you do. If you play a lot of MMOs, you've got your attack buttons, and so you're hitting your attack buttons because the computer doesn't have any other way of interacting. But the great thing about D&D is the DM is a person and can react and come up with cool responses to weird out of the box ideas.
Now, how can we as a DM encourage our players to use more of these, try more different things, try things that are outside of the box? Stop just attacking, stop just casting spells. Imagine yourself in this area where your character is. What do you do aside from just swing sword and make the HP go down?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the easiest way and the thing that the DM has the most control over is make the monsters do it. Have the monsters do cool stunts. And some of that is by figuring out, like, what does the monster want in an encounter? A monster doesn't live their life sitting, I'm in my lair, I hope some PCs come along and kill me today. They don't. That's not the life of a monster.
I mean, unless they're a guard monster, in which case,
Well, if they're a guard monster, what they want is to get off of their shift and go play poker with the other guards or whatever. You don't need to like figure out the inner life of every monster you come across.
No.
But it's something you can do ad hoc at the table. So picturing again the room full of kobolds that we discussed earlier.
Those poor kobolds.
Those poor kobolds. Yep. So imagine for a minute the PCs come bursting in with flame and sword. The kobolds who are on guard are like, oh shit, there's humans here. We got to defend our brethren. The kobolds who are just, doing their daily thing are like, ow, what the heck? And they're probably going to run for it. Right. And maybe there's one kobold at the back who's like, I've hated you all for so long. I want you all to die, and I'm going to go with these new people. Right. Or something, just something small like that.
And that's how the kobold joins the party.
Exactly. So that's where Meepo comes from. The point is that the monsters are all going to do their thing, and especially if you make the monsters smart and make the monsters think tactically, do cool stuff, then players will start. Well, first of all, the players, if they're not expecting it, they're going to get their butts kicked.
Yes,
and that's always a great way to learn a lesson. But the other thing is that they're going to start seeing, oh, you know what, that technique of having all the defenders run up to the front and do nothing but dodge was really effective, because we can't hit any of them and we can't get past any of them.
You have to convince them that it's actually useful, because a lot of players, as they go, try to are going into this combat mode, they still have the feeling like, well, I'm not doing damage, I'm not helpful. But like you said, they as you throw that into an actual encounter and you see how effective it is, they may want to say, okay, well, I am a tank, I should be keeping these other creatures from getting to the people behind me. That's my job. So that dodge thing really worked. Yeah, well, that's the thing is when do lots of damage is the most effective tactic. That's all the players are going to do. So you need to look for ways to make that not be the most effective tactic as a DM. And the best way to do that is by having your monsters play smart. And there's blogs about it. There's Monsters Know What They're Doing is a famous one. And Tucker's Kobolds is another famous instance. The kobolds that everyone hates.
Yes. And I remember in particular in the Storm King's Thunder game, there was a little subplot about chasing the Drow through the Underdark because they were going to go get a piece of the Fire Titan. And you guys worked very, very effectively to chase this Drow down until she was in a Dwergar holdout.
Yeah, like it's this little house of a Dwergar. Yeah, she had like hid out there, and her guards were in the house, and you guys burst in, and she like levitated up the chimney because that was all she had left. She'd used all of her spells during this chase, and that was all she had left. She levitated up the chimney. Wearing her down.
You guys fought the guards except for Surfy's rogue, who climbed up the chimney and slashed her head off with a very effective sneak attack.
Who does that?
He does, but that was what I thought was a very cool, very great cinematic sequence of this pitched battle between the two of them wedged into the chimney. I'm like, that's not boring at all, but it was not a stand there and roll dice.
It was not it wasn't a standard thing. It wasn't the typical I'm just out to do more damage. Of course, in that case, Surfax was out to kill it, but
yeah, I mean, the murder was still the point, but
yes.
it was more interesting than just a stand up fight. And the other thing is inject role playing into your combat, like have the villains give speeches, have them sneer, have them, please, I have a family, or whatever, just.
We haven't run into that yet.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where I've done it a few times in the past, so I think this particular group has not run into it. But
I'm definitely guilty of not injecting roleplay into combat as much as I should. I feel like you brought up to me in the last Everkeep combat. It's like you all were trying to get information out of this person, this captain of the bandits, and nothing was happening. Nothing was coming out of it. And I could have put more. That really falls on the DM to put more role play more things in combat itself. Combat is not just a thing to get past. Yeah. It is a tool for roleplay in a role-playing game.
Yeah, and how a character fights can be a factor of role-playing too. A character who constantly disengages and runs away has a very different feel from a character who's standing there taunting you and power attacking you the whole time.
Yes.
Right? And you can use that to inform the roleplay, and you can also use that to you can use the roleplay to inform their tactics, like figuring out, this character, this monster, doesn't really want this fight, right? He's here to get the MacGuffin. So while the characters are all me kill you, this guy is gonna deal the gem and run. That's his plan.
Right.
Anything you can do like that to make it about something other than a race to 0 hit points is going to make it a lot more interesting. There's a common gag among the role playing community of you could role play in Monopoly, right? And it's true.
I would do that. I would role play in Monopoly.
Well, I mean, Jamie has literally done it, so it is a thing that happens. And some people use that as a criticism of simple systems like 5e. It's like, why do I bother to have this whole system if you can role play in Monopoly? What do I need the game system for at all? The game part of D&D is there to provide a structure.
Right.
It's there to give you something more to chew on. You and I in our Twitter group have done just pure role play with no rules at all.
Yes.
And it works. It can be done.
It is perfectly fine to do that without any rules at all. Yeah, free-form role play is a thing. You don't need to roll dice.
Yeah, but what one of the things I like the system for is the emergent factor. The dice tell you something, and you have to make a story out of that, right? If you're doing the pure role play like we do online sometimes, where my character leaps into battle and I decide whether they defeat their foe or not, I decide if they get hurt or not, that can be very good too. But I know everything that's coming.
Right.
Whereas if the dice tell me something and I have to...
You don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Then it's a surprise.
Maybe some of that surprise is what people are concerned about.
5e is super modular. It was specifically designed to be super modular. It's the greatest hits of D&D.
It is.
So you can tweak it, crank up parts of it however you want. But you need to know what's happening going in. So if you start your campaign by everybody rolling 46 and dropping the lowest, and everybody can have feats, and everybody's got a golf bag full of magic items.
That's going to be easy as heck.
You can tweak all of that. And so if you play with the sort of more normal, what I think of as normal, and the way our group does it, we generally do a 27-point buy, you can have feats, etc. Right. That's a little more powerful, and we have a large group, and so that
I
makes
feel
it
like that's a
more
little more
powerful.
middle of the road, but at the same time, we have mentioned we have not died in
Yeah,
not having a player death in 4 years. So
yeah,
yeah,
and I think one of the key aspects of that is the nightly long rest refreshes everything. In my Tomb of Annihilation game, where you have to find a long rest somewhere that's safe, and so you've got days between long rests, and you have lots of encounters between long rests, it's a lot more likely to somebody that might die, and it hasn't happened yet.
it hasn't
But
happened. It's gotten pretty close.
there have been times when I was certainly worried about it, and I know Plotline, begins every session with, I guess Dr. Brood's going to die tonight. I'll start working on my new character. I mean, he was like literally writing up a new character during that last fight, and I was
It
like,
hasn't happened yet.
so. But I mean, you can limit long rests. That's a great way to bump up difficulty. You can change how death saves work. Tomb of Annihilation has a difficulty as a 15 instead of a 10.
Oh,
Um,
it is.
well, not in a game as we run
Oh,
it.
that's
An
right.
option.
We're not
That's
running.
the
That's
meat
right.
grinder.
You asked us
But
that in the beginning.
yeah.
Yes.
You can bump monster hit points, but
It
at that
definitely
point
becomes a slog.
you need to start looking at, is the combat going to be 6 rounds long, because that really does become boring.
Yes, I have run into that issue where I have tried to bump up the difficulty where I just use max hit points for the monster, but it's like by the time you get to that 4th or 5th round, it's like, this is dull.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should have done something else.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons that bounded accuracy, they're always like, more monsters is better than tougher monsters.
Yes.
Um, and bounded accuracy also means that the real difficulty dial is hit points.
Yes.
Because most of your attacks are along here, most of your armor class is along here. What's going to make the monster last or go down fast is how many hit points it has,
or how many hit points you have.
Yeah,
because a person who is standing is someone who can effectively bring down the monster's hit points. If you are not standing, you are not bringing down the monster's hit points.
So one way to increase the difficulty without creating a slog is double your monster's damage output and leave their hit points where they are, or even lower their hit points so that they become more like glass cannons.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make fights very swingy that way. The characters, whoever wins initiative wins the fight. You get rocket tag going on and stuff like that. That is definitely more exciting. It also might wreak havoc with a storyline if you're following a storyline. So, that's something to watch out for.
How difficult a campaign is really depends on also the players and the DM.
Yes.
Like if you have a group of players who will work together, just as on the players' side,
good teamwork makes the dream
good
work.
Teamwork, you're not going to die very often. Even if your characters are not, the most best at teamwork, you can still have them do basic things like do medicine checks, make sure that someone is standing, someone is healthy, because you understand that your characters have the basic understanding that if people are up and alive, you're going to get through this fight.
Yeah, a healer and a pocket healer in the party, just that right there will increase your survivability by like 90%, because if the healer goes down, the pocket healer brings the healer back up, or vice versa.
And the DM has 2 people to try and bring down before you can actually bring down the rest of the group.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, if you've got a bunch of stumble bums who all swan off and do their own thing, and they're all trying to get the kill and don't care about everybody else,
your group is not going to live. You're going to run into the issue where they are all going to drop in different portions of the dungeon, and by the time someone does come over to them to help them, they will have failed their death saves.
How big of a dick is your DM about it, right? so for instance, the best way to make your players hate a monster is somebody goes down, the monster immediately keeps pounding on that fallen character.
And if that happens, that character is going to go down fast, because when they're down, then that monster is immediately with them. They get advantage on every melee attack.
Yeah, they're basically going to go to a critical hit, which is going to knock down 2 death saves on their first hit, right? And on their second hit, assuming the character did not fail their death save on their turn, second hit, that character is dead.
It's just dead.
Plain dead.
It's just dead. It's just like that. It's super fast.
The knight, he would joust with the lance. If he got knocked off his horse, he would fight with the arming sword. But when his enemy was down on the ground, he would pull out his dagger and finish him off.
Right.
Or there were infantry who came along with their pikes after everybody had been knocked off their horse and
just make sure they're all dead.
He's dead.
Yeah.
He's dead.
That is probably a big reason why we have not had a player death in 4 years, is because the two of us are not dicks.
Yeah, that really is. I mean, my general philosophy is when you go down, a monster assumes you're dead and moves on to the next one, unless I have a specific reason.
I'm not saying it's that much of a dick to go and kill your players' characters, but it's a little dickish.
It's something you want to reserve for the monsters you want them to hate.
Yes.
I forget who it was. I had one of the giants. I think one of the evil giant lords did it to somebody.
Yes.
Just the first time.
Yes.
Didn't get to do it the second time, so the character survived. But the second he did that, everybody was like, "Okay, that guy's going down."
we just dogpiled on him, and he did not survive.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was, but they did not survive.
Yeah, it's been a while now. The other thing about 5e being super modular is you can homebrew stuff, you can change it however you like, you can steal stuff from games you like. So if you're bored with player abilities, Matt Colville has a whole video on stealing stuff from 4e and bringing it into 5e. Most of it can be lifted whole cloth without too much difficulty.
I've done it from 3.5. I brought forward some magic item abilities.
Yeah, and if you look at if you look at the Kobold Press, like the Creature Codex, and those monsters are written for Pathfinder first, and then retroactively or retrofitted, or however you want to describe it, for 5e before they're published for 5e. So they've got a lot of abilities that are weird for 5e. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. You can put a magic circle in the middle of your fight that is, as long as you start your turn in the circle and end your turn in the circle, you get a free cantrip or a free first level spell. Suddenly that makes that an important tactical thing, and so you'll have people fighting over the magic circle. You could, instead of inspiration providing you advantage on a roll or something like that, you could say you can trade inspiration for a die 4 superiority die and use a battle master maneuver or something like that. But the thing about any rules you adopt or any rules you homebrew, there's things you got to look out for. Like, don't do the nickel and dime bonuses. Don't do +1, +2, +1.
You've stopped me from doing that a few times, and I understand completely how that doesn't really work in 5e, because, well, one, it just bogs everything down.
Yeah 5e is designed to do impactful things. Something that makes a little difference, don't bother with it. Something that makes a big difference, do that.
Yes.
There's only one real flat bonus in 5e, and that's cover, which
Yes.
gives you +2 to your AC. And the only reason they did that, originally it was going to just be attacks against you have disadvantage, but the only reason they didn't go that route is because they used a disadvantage already, and they wanted something where you could have disadvantage and cover, right? So that if you managed to get advantage on an attack, you still couldn't shoot through keyholes with it, right?
Right.
So that's why cover still has that. But everything else, they're like, make it advantage, disadvantage. It's nice and simple. It's very impactful, and it doesn't require a lot of math.
Nope.
We mentioned slog.
Yes.
I in the game before the one where you started, I took one of Sly Flourish's fantastic location suggestions. I had this fight in sewers with ghouls, and there was a statue that radiated necrotic energy. So every round at initiative 20, it would do this burst, and all the ghouls would regenerate.
Oh. Yeah, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, I thought that would be very exciting. It's like, oh, we've got to go destroy the statue so that the ghouls don't regenerate. Instead, the players, for whatever reason, just kept fighting.
They ignored the statue and just kept attacking the ghouls because they were an obvious thing to attack.
Yeah, and I was trying to make it clear that the statues, You feel sickly energy fill the room, and the ghouls are energized and their wounds closed, and they attack you again. And players just kept fighting the ghouls.
I guess they just like dealing with the ghouls.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. They were like 3rd level, and I put them up against a couple of helmed horrors in a room. And helmed horrors are they're I think they're like CR5. It was a doable fight, but it took forever because the helm horrors had lots of hit points. They were very hard to hit. And 6 or 7 rounds in, we're all just like, can this fight be over already? And none of the players went down, although they were all chewed up.
Right.
But it was boring. It was like eventually you could see the helm horrors were going to die eventually.
At some point.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of how long it's going to take.
Yeah. So you really got to watch out. You really got to watch out for slug.
Maybe that's what a lot of people are saying when they say is 5e is boring. Is like they're running into the slog more often than not, because
maybe
a lot of the old style ways of increasing difficulty, increasing the HP, regeneration, it's just boring in 5e, which is meant to be a snappier combat sort of thing.
That was the key thing that they were going through when they were doing playtesting was 4e. 5e was as much a reaction to 4e as 4e was a reaction to 3e. And there's a lot of 4e DNA in 5e. It's just they made the language nicer. They disguised encounter actions as you have to have a short or long rest.
Right.
That's 5e for this is an encounter power.
Yes.
Right.
Basically.
Stuff like that. And so they looked at what worked in 4e, and a lot of it, like on the DM side, was great. Like how they treated monsters in 4e was awesome. You could just push button, level them up, level them down, and stuff like that. The big problem with 4e, I think, was on the player side, and we won't get into that right now. But but where was I going with that? Oh, well, they looked at what was good about 4e, and they said, okay, well, what can we take from this and get rid of the long, sluggy combat with bazillion interrupts and +1, +2, +1, +1, +1. So, I mean, that's why you get one reaction,
right,
and no more. One of the big things with 4e, especially once you got up to a certain level, was that I do this. Well, this triggers this power. And when I do this power, that character can do this other power. And the DM's like, yes, but that power causes this monster to have this reaction. And you're 5 or 6 interrupt levels deep. And then finally at the end, you're like, whose turn was it? Who's gone? I've forgotten. I mean, imagine doing that with the ADHD, right?
I think I'll pass on that one.
Yeah, so they tried to go back to a very clean, you have your turn, and they have their turn, and they have their turn, and you can react to something going on, so it's not completely static, but it's also not this crazy bazillion interrupts. And I think 5e is perfectly fine. I have things that I would like to see in my dream RPG. The most of the things that I don't like about 5e are things that are endemic to the Dungeons and Dragons experience. I would like a different kind of game entirely. But I have to play with the rest of the group, and the rest of the group, Jamie specifically likes having choose from column A, choose from column B, choose from column C character creation, and like growing his character instead of starting with a concept and building his character, right? So hero system is absolutely a terrible system for Jamie. So my point with that is just we're in a group, and everybody in the group has to be able to access the game, and that's one thing that D&D generally, and 5e especially, is very good at, is being playable by everybody.
It's very inclusive to everyone. It's not an exclusive thing that is to specific people who have specific tastes. It is a generalized system that is meant for a wider range of people. Now, I feel like D&D in general has been slowly going towards that, and that's why they go towards this less mathy, less in-depth sort of feel. And for me, it's a really great system. One, because I am ADHD, so the fewer things you put in front of me, the more likely I'm going to pay attention and have a straight thought.
Yes.
But for me, I also feel like what I would add to it would be to include in the base game, or have some sort of supplement where it goes along things like our stunt system, or it goes along things like saying, you can do this. You don't have to just attack. These are a range of suggested ideas on what else you can do during combat, or what else you can do as a player or a DM for your characters or for your enemies.
Yeah, well, like every edition up until fourth or fifth, I forget which, had as a in the DM's book usually like a transcript of like a sample game, what a sample game is like, right? 5e doesn't have that stuff. 5e sort of works from the assumption that you know how to play D&D generally, and these are the specific rules for this edition. And so, I think as it has blossomed in popularity with Critical Role and all these other things suddenly making it mainstream and cool to be into D&D in a way that it hasn't been since the 80s, that having more this is how you play the game baked into the game would not go amiss. D&D is sort of everybody's first role-playing game.
I do feel like Critical Role has helped to encourage people to do more things than just attack, or encourage people to roleplay, but that is a totally different episode. We could be wrong. It could be a totally boring system. We wouldn't know it, but you play what you like. In the end of the day, you play D&D how you like. You put together D&D how you like, and you enjoy it in your way.
Yeah, if you want it to be mathy and crunchy,
Do
play
it.
Pathfinder. If you really love 4E, and some people did, it's still playable. The books still exist. Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds have modules to use them. Go for it. It really is.
Just have fun. That's the point of it. Make it your game.
Yeah, but I mean, if before making a pronouncement that 5e is boring, maybe just sort of look at, are you taking advantage of everything it's giving you?
What are you doing? Like, how are your players taking what you can do? Is your DM doing everything they can, or are you creating a slog for yourself?
So I think we've talked it into the ground.
We've definitely talked that one into the ground. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about next time?
Next week we have, I think I get to choose the topic next week. As you can see, Nish picked the topic this week. He has a lot of opinions on this one, and I agree with him. I agree that there's a lot to say on this one. But on my list, we have the right way to play D&D, ADHD and D&D. Say that 5 times fast. And one that I get heated about is, are the old races boring or overdone?
Speaking of things being boring, yeah. So viewers, pick one you like. If you don't pick one, then we'll pick one.
I'll just pick one ourselves.
Yeah. As always, for every YouTube channel out there, if you like and subscribe, it helps us grow. There's a notification bell somewhere that will let you know when our videos come up. Our first 2 were quite long, and so we're trying to shorten them down, maybe get them out a little quicker.
I'm looking at the recording time on this one. That's not going to happen.
Well, I don't know. We'll see what we can edit out too. But and I want to plug my Patreon because that's how I make my living. So
it'll be down in the doobly-doo below.
/the_niche, yeah. So thanks for coming, everybody, and we will see you next time.
I wasn't recording that.
You weren't recording?
Normally it's fine, but when I put my pop filter on it, it's just slightly too heavy. just ever slightly too heavy, and the waveform collapses. stay.